can see it.
Perfect. I guess with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for tonight. This is a friend of mine, first and foremost. He's a coworker of mine as well. We both work for a company up in Peabody, Massachusetts called GraVoc and Associates. Actually, you can see the nice jersey. What's a hoodie? It's a hoodie, isn't it, Mike?
Micro hoodie.
Micro hoodie. That's whatever it is. It's something, but I'm rocking that tonight. He is actually the director of information security and research. I'm correct on that, Mike?
Sounds good.
All right, cool. So again, friend and coworker, and he's going to be speaking tonight. Obviously, what it says right here. But with that, I'm going to let Mike do the rest of it. And if you're keeping tally, that's 6 or 7 times someone has said Corona. So if you have not drank 6 or 7 shots of whatever, you should probably be getting caught up right now. So with that, Mike, take it away, my friend.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. I believe that we have another colleague on the line that might want to jump in at some point. His name's Chris. Chris, feel free to type in the chat or raise your hand if you want.
Yep, I'm here.
Cool. All right. So Josh reached out to me and asked me to put together basically a top 5 or 10 ways that how quick can we get to domain admin when we're doing our internal pen tests. And he just wanted me to kind of flush it out and document the top ways that we go about that. You'll see, I'm going to go through, I think, about 7 different ways that we go, quote unquote, 0 to hero, meaning no username is provided, no credentials or anything like that. So basically, all we get typically is a box on the network and an IP address. And then what can we do from there? All right, Josh. Cool. All right. Yes, this is the most boring slide. My name is Mike. I've been doing pen testing for about 10 years. I originally got into this field when I was about 12 years old. I was on the computer and someone opened up a notepad file on my computer and put a little smiley face in there. And I wasn't touching the computer. And I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know what was happening. So from that day forward, basically, I said, how could somebody get into my computer? What's going on? I want to learn about this stuff. And I did. Chris also works with us at GraVoc with Josh, and Nate is also on this line as well. And I believe he's been doing pen testing for over 5 years now. All right, let's just go right into number 1 way that we go get it from 0 to hero. Yeah, domain admin for everybody. All right, so as I stated previously, the first thing that we typically get is we'll ship a box, or that could be a Raspberry Pi, it could be an Intel NUC device, it could be anything really, anything that can get network connectivity. So we typically ship that box to a client, and sometimes we'll get a static IP ahead of time, sometimes we don't. We'll just hope that they are DHCP. If they don't, we also provide an out-of-band connection, typically over 4G. So just in case we can't get an IP initially, at least we can get to our quote-unquote drop box on the network. The second that's plugged in, I usually run Wireshark or tcpdump just to see what's on the network, see what kind of traffic, what kind of devices. If I see anything that looks, older, maybe I'll go after that first, something along those lines. But this is probably the number 1 way right here that I go from nothing to domain admin. I start with, right after the Wireshark, I start with running a crackmapexec module. And I generate a list of computers that don't have SMB signing enabled. So typically, I recommend pushing this out to the entire company. I would say 95% of the time, this isn't covered 100%. So whether that be because of a legacy device, a Windows XP machine, or some kind of something that's running some kind of old healthcare software, or if it's a manufacturing PC that needs to be up and running at all times, whatever it may be. This is rarely covered 100% of the time. So as soon as I run this crackmapexec module and I generate this list, that's my target list to basically start going after and running the responder tool. So you'll see, I mean, none of this stuff is new or anything like that. It's just what I see from the environments that I pen test on, you know, on a daily basis. Right after that, there's my list. I then fire up responder and alongside ntlmrelayx from the impacket library. And basically, you know, I'm trying to create a man in the middle. I'm saying, hey, talk to me, whether that be over SMB or another protocol. 9 out of 10 times it's going to be SMB. And then from there, I usually see hashes fly by, and I just kind of relay them across the network using crackmapexec. Now, do I just blatantly take that and spray it across the entire range? No, because that's too noisy off the bat. But I'll usually use it on one machine, 1 or 2 machines from that target list. And the first step from there would be to try to dump the local hashes in that machine. And if the local hashes happen to be, let's say, there's a local admin on that machine, you know, now I can operate as a local administrator on that machine. If I'm real lucky, you know, maybe a domain admin has logged into that machine, I can see their credentials. And even better, if they don't have a local administrator password solution in place, so like a Microsoft Labs or some other solution where the local admin password is different per device. Most places I see, actually it's a mixture now, so it's probably more half and half. Half the places I've tested have some kind of local admin solution, and half don't. So obviously the ones that don't make that job really easy. I can reuse that local admin credential across multiple devices until I get a domain admin credential. Next slide. These are just these are literally, well, some of this is from the help on the actual GitHub pages, and some of this is actually, you know, stuff that we've taken from clients and have matched it. But in any case, that first command, that crackmapexec SMB, and then the network and the list, that is exactly the command I use just about every network I go. And right underneath that is the responder command, the exact command I use on every network I pen test. Does it work every time? No. Does it work the bulk of the time? Yes. So after I generate that list, the responder fires up. You can go to the next slide. I will also have the NTLM relay running, passing, trying to get some kind of SMB connection and dumping that local hash on the machine. So next slide will show a connection of and dumping the local hashes. In this screenshot here, I think I was lucky and saw, yep, there's a local administrator one there. And that local admin password was reused on more than one device, let's just say that. So from that, I was able to laterally move until I eventually got a machine that had privileged access where somebody was logged into, and I was able to dump their credentials and have full access to the environment. Oh, this one, so there's a crackmapexec module showing essentially that. That doesn't show the local admin one in the previous slide, but it's the same process. I would substitute the hash and put the right subnet in there, right username, and fire away.
And Mike, these slides will be available after the presentation too, correct?
Correct.
Perfect. I was got a couple of questions about that, so next slide, sorry.
So the number 2 way I go from nobody to somebody is I scan the entire network for ILO ports, so HP ILOs, Dell IDRACs, or SuperMicros. I dump the hashes from there, I crack them, and sometimes those ILO interfaces or IPMI interfaces to be correct there. They will have other backup admin accounts on those interfaces. So those passwords are typically reused throughout the network. So let's say I dump a built-in admin hash on HP ILO. By default, that's going to be, I believe it's 8 characters. It's Chris, you can correct me on this, but it's about 8 characters. It's usually numbers and letters only. So that's
right.
crackable in minutes. So usually if I get that, I'll dump the rest of the usernames that's on that interface, and I'll see if I can use one of those passwords somewhere else in the network. Typically, that's possible.
Hey, Mike, I got a question there. Someone's asking, what is ILO? Or just to explain, high-level overview of what ILO is.
Yeah, so that's like integrated lights out. That's probably HP's, I believe. There's another one, the Dell IDRAC. There's also SuperMicro. Basically, they're all IPMI interfaces. Essentially, it's another way to manage the bare metal box that all your virtual machines sit on. So this could be located on the motherboard, or let's say on the back. If you look at the back of a server, you'll have multiple Ethernet jacks, or it could be some other protocol or connection. But typically, you'll see multiple Ethernet cables plugged into the back of that server, and that ILO, IDRAC type port is used to manage. It's an out-of-band communication. So let's say all your servers died, or VM went down, or you couldn't access one of those machines. This is another way into the bare metal, server itself. So you could basically get in there and see what's going on. It's usually there to manage to see, hey, is performance up and running, the uptime, if something goes wrong, things like that. That's what I've seen it typically used for.
Perfect. Thank you.
So again, let's say, for example, I don't get an admin hash that I can crack, or something I can't reuse. Let's say I at least get into the ILO, but I can't get that built-in admin because it's not used on the network. It's just for the ILO. Then the next thing I'll try is I'll see if it has some kind of way for me to boot up a external CD or USB. So essentially, I would be able to boot up an external image and mount the actual physical hard drive on that server. So that would be all the VMs that are located on that, everything. I'd be able to remotely mount that, and from there you can dump the credentials, from all those, backups of the VMs per se. Now, do I do that one often in a live environment? Absolutely not, because that would require me to reboot the bare metal server, which would take down all the virtual machines on that server, which would definitely interrupt the business. So that one is certainly I err on the side of caution, and I ask before I do that one. And also, if it's on, let's say it's on a test network or a demo network or something like that, or a non-production network, then it's fair game. I'll definitely do that attack. And you'll also see on this, at the end, you'll see some references to get a little more detail on all this stuff. But you'll see the defaults. I mean, I talked about the HP ILO one. The Dell IDRAC, the default password is Calvin. The username is root. SuperMicro ones are admin, and it has to be uppercase. So I mean, we can go to the next slide. Yeah, that's a very, very common way I go from 0 to hero there. And you'll see, so this is one of the tools that I'll run. Initially, it's the ILO scan tool. So what this will do is it will look at it will scan for ILO ports, and it will produce the version numbers. So if I find an older version number, for example, an outdated firmware on the ILO port, I can typically just bypass these controls and create my own backdoor to that system. So if they're not fully patched and running the latest firmware, I can usually just create another account. Instead of the admin, I can make another admin account and then log into that system that way. And again, these are all, publicly available tools, exploits, all that good stuff. Another plus with running that tool is anything that comes back, like a 200 OK, it doesn't always show the firmware version. It doesn't always mean it's a ILO port there, but you'll see different responses. So basically, it's essentially saying, "Hey, are you open on port 443 or 80, something along those lines?" It's a lighter port scan at the same time. So anything that comes back from these ILO scans that I do, I'll manually visit those web pages too, or try to get to them through SSH. So sometimes I get lucky, and these are not ILO ports, but I'll find something like a switch or a printer that might have creds in there, and I'll go from there, all from running this lighter type port scan, ILO scan tool. The next one, this is a part of the same, another way to dump the hashes from these IPMI ports. This is just a Metasploit module. It's built into Metasploit, so you can use the default. Usually the default dictionary that's in the Metasploit one works very well, since it has all the defaults in there for all the major vendors, which is typically what I'm looking for when I initially do this anyway. As you'll see, that one of this says, this one's from a real client. You'll see, IPMI hash found, and you'll see you see the administrator one, and then below that, there's also another username in there. And that hash in particular was a password reuse one. So I took that hash and I did the crackmapexec tool and sprayed that across some of the targeted systems I chose. And it just so happened to be a privileged account. Typically, if I'm going to get a backup account on these IPMI interfaces, it's going to be a privileged account. I say that because, this is usually falls under somebody that works in IT or security or somebody around in those departments. So they usually have more privileges. Next slide. The next attack vector that I come across quite frequently is network file share. So basically, excessive permissions or open file shares or something along those lines. They're a little too exposed to the environment. So my methodology here is to scan the whole environment for these excessive permissions. You can use any number of tools. I really find that the NFS mount module in Metasploit works very well, and it's pretty quick too. So eventually, I'll run the scan with the Metasploit, and I'll see backups. That's usually that's the juiciest one. So I can find an open share that might have a password file in it, Excel file or something along those lines. But really, the biggest ones that I come across, and also the most, the ones that allow me to get to domain the fastest, domain admin, is the ones that have the backups. So it could be a backup of a Dell case appliance. It could be a backup of your domain controller. It could be a backup of your file server. Whatever. Basically, what I'm saying here is, look out for excessive permissions on all file shares. I mean, anything that has a backup of any virtual machine, even if it's just your typical standard image that you're pushing out, they have credentials stored on there. They have sensitive information. So that's what I'm looking for. If I find that, I mount that back up to my machine and I extract, all the credentials I can from that backup. And then I can either crack them if I need to crack them, or I use those hashes again and spray them throughout the network.
So I'm gonna jump in for the defenders on the team in the meeting here. Make sure to tell people who are storing these things to not store them in a place that are easily found like this, or basically encrypt them at rest. So it's useless if, say, someone like Mike does find it.
Yeah, exactly. And I just scan for these every so often. I know there's always new backup appliances being switched in and out, and sometimes you'll see older type, even tape drives or anything along those lines. You'll see older solutions just used there for a cold storage type or archive type solutions. You know, a lot of times it's still connected to the network. So even if you think that it's locked down or you know, not accessible, they typically contain a lot of sensitive information and allow me to move faster through the network. Next slide. This is just showing the Metasploit module here, the NFS mount one that I like to use. It's efficient, it's fast, it tells me what I need to know, and I move forward from there. The number 4-way from 0 to hero. So I scan the entire network for, say, open printers here. So that means I look for any printers on the network, since these are not typically hardened. This, I would say, is almost neglected at most places I go. I always get the question, why do I care about the printer? It prints paper, or well, what have you. You know, how can you get on the printer and take over the entire environment? Well, most places I go to now have, you know, scan to email type functionality or some kind of scan to you know, network file share, what have you. You know, you put a piece of paper in, you scan it, PDFs in your inbox. How does that happen? Well, in the background, that has to authenticate somewhere to, you know, an LDAP type server probably. So that has some type of credentials stored in that printer. You know, the first way into the printer is the actual interface itself. So I'll browse to it, you know, port 80 or 443, or I'll try to get to it on Telnet or SSH. And more often than not, the default credentials are found on these printers. And all it takes is one default credential on one of these printers to go from, you know, nothing to domain admin typically. And again, printers are getting switched out. It's hard to manage. There's numerous printers everywhere between, you know, 10 and, you know, I don't know, 20,000. So it's a bear to manage all this. But in any case, I'll typically get in through the interface with default credentials. I will then look for any LDAP type connection and change that IP. So typically it's looking at the, you know, the main controller or file server, something along those lines. I'll typically change that IP. Now this is a brief change because I don't want to take down the printer. All this really does is maybe if the printer's in use or somebody's trying to scan a bunch of files at that exact moment, it may hiccup for a minute or two, a risk that I'm usually allowed to take. And I try not to do it on a machine that's, you know, heavily in use. But in any case, I'll change that IP of where the email or scan is looking at, and I'll put it to my virtual machine or my machine. So my machine will be now the LDAP server, and when somebody tries to scan something or when I do a lookup on that printer, it will send me, either depending on the model and the version, it will send me the password of that, whoever that could be. It could be like a printer scanner account. It will send me the hash or the cleartext password of that account. From there, I'll take that account and again, use those credentials across the network. I will say more often than not, this is overlooked because when these printers are being set up, usually from what I've seen, again, this isn't the case everywhere, those accounts are set with excessive privileges. So if it's a scan account or a printer account or whatever the name may be, it's usually in a privileged group. So just from logging into the printer interface, I now have a privileged account, you know, just like that. Next slide. So you'll see some of the actual set, you know, backend configuration settings here. You'll see, I think this one was called mail account. I'll change the, you know, server address to my address. I'll generate a lookup, you know, it says search address book. I'll put something in that address book field, like any name. I'll click the button. I'll have Netcat or Responder or any number of tools running on my machine that can capture the either clear text credential or the hash of that account on the system, on the printer. The number 5 way is, it's sad to say, but MS1710, Eternal Blue, or whatever name anyone may want to call it, is still in existence at quite a few places I go. I typically find this more on, nowadays, more on Windows Server 2008 R2 systems, where they're running it for, you know, legacy purposes, or they just haven't gotten around to upgrading it because, you know, the list is always long. So I don't typically understand 100% why this patch in particular isn't applied to those systems. I understand that those operating systems need to be run for certain business applications. However, I always recommend to, you know, apply the specific patch because it's that big of a deal. You know, you scan the network for this, you exploit it, and you have system access to that machine, especially if it's the server. You know, I'm already domain admin in sometimes 2 minutes. Next slide. This is just showing an example of, you know, running that MS1710 on a network here. Again, it brings back a session, and then from there I can extract the credentials from that system since I'm running as this is a very straightforward scanning the network for this. Next one. The next one here. So, you know, I'm sure some of you have probably seen a number of articles on, you know, top 5 ways to domain admin by, you know, I think it's by Trustwave, and a couple other people have made some Medium type posts. This one was not on there. This one is more from what another one I personally see. Quite a few places use the Solarwinds Dameware and haven't patched it in the past year. So why is that important? Because this specific patch is almost like saying the Eternal Blue patch, for example. So I'll scan the whole network for the SolarWinds Dameware patch to see if it's in place or not. I'll run an exploit, and I have system access to that machine, so I'm able to dump the credentials. And typically, the SolarWinds Dameware, if you're using that, it's going to be on the greater portion of your network. So that means system access to almost every device on the network. And again, this usually takes, you know, a few minutes to run. You go to the next slide. The fastest way, there's a couple ways. You can run a couple Python scripts, but a lot of times we're allowed to run, you know, vulnerability type assessment tools. In this case, I have a screenshot of Nessus. Nessus will pick up on this, and then I'll run a Python script with typically an interpreter type payload. So I usually obfuscate it quite a bit so it doesn't get picked up by AV or next gen AV or anything like that. But that's the process that I'll scan for the SolarWinds Dameware, and I'll run a Python script that will talk back to my interpreter session. So that's a very quick way. Number 7 way. MITM6 and ntlmrelayx. So ntlmrelayx and crackmapexec and Responder, you'll see, are very versatile, and I use quite a bit across a number of different attacks. But in any case, this one specifically, man-in-the-middle 6, a lot of places I go into either don't know or neglect or just have not gotten to IPv6 in general. So this is going to be enabled by default on many systems, and it's another attack vector that I can go from nobody to domain admin. So this is usually a last resort type scenario for me because it's the noisiest. So all these other attacks, I'm not adding anything to those systems. I'm not really doing anything extra. I'm usually running things in memory. I'm not installing anything on the systems. This one is definitely noisier, but it works very well. So why do I say it's noisier? That's because when I run the attack, it typically will add either a user to the system or a computer account in Active Directory or whatever environment I'm pen testing. The process here is I'll run the MITM6 tool, which essentially will take over the DNS servers on the target machine that I'm trying to attack over the IPv6 network. So that machine will all of a sudden try to go to, say google.com, but instead it goes to me. While it's doing that, I also have a bunch of servers running through ntlmrelayx, and it will send me credentials there. Now, those credentials are typically, I try to go after higher value targets, obviously, in this scenario. Once I get those, I don't see those credentials in clear text. What it does is relays those and adds a computer object to Active Directory. That computer object, it will also have a username and password, as you can see in the screenshot here. And I can use that to further move throughout the network. So once I have those credentials, I can basically start creating more accounts or moving throughout the network and eventually getting to domain admin. Typically, I try to go after somebody in IT, since they will probably have these protocols enabled on their machines, from my experience, and it allows me to go basic from no user at all to a privileged account. And how do we stop all this? This is the most important slide. Anybody can hack, but how do you defend? Patch. This is obvious stuff, but patch, especially with those Eternal Blue and the Dameware ones. Those I still see, and they're critical. Somebody can take over the entire environment in minutes by not having those patches applied. The two go hand in hand. So disabling the LLMNR and WPAD and enforcing SMB Signing Everywhere, a lot of these attacks would be stopped. So I wouldn't be able to relay credentials or what have you if these were put across the board in place. So typically we recommend pushing this out through group policy or something along those lines. But what we see more often than not is, we'll make that recommendation, especially on clients that we have repeat business with. They'll push this out across the entire environment through group policy, but that will be anything that's on the domain. So there's a number of devices that do not qualify as on the domain. That could be an HVAC system, that could be anything, your doors, your alarms, any other system that's just on a work group or not on the domain. So they won't be getting those same policies. A lot of times those work group type machines that do not have this policy enforced will also have other accounts from the domain with the same password on those. So I would get on the work group type machine, dump those hashes, And you see a lot of password reuse and credential reuse there. So I would take that and, again, spray that across the actual domain. And it works more often than not. The default credentials, I mean, this just goes without saying. The biggest problem I see with the default credentials is basically those, the ILO ports, the IPMI ports, and printers. So I see defaults on those in almost every single environment I pen test, and those are, it's a huge hole. I don't think that a lot of places see the true risk from just having a printer with default credentials or having the default password on an HP ILO port. Hence, I mean, that's part of the reason we do what we do. But again, changing all default credentials is critical to stopping all these attacks. The next bullet item here, 14 characters or greater. This is a nightmare for everybody, including myself. Nobody likes to type in long passwords. This will always be a struggle, whether that be if somebody wants to have a shorter password and have some kind of multi-factor in place, or something along those lines. At a bare minimum, we try to stress 14 characters or more on privileged type accounts. Given the computing power in the cloud nowadays and cracking these passwords, it's so fast. I mean, it's shocking, actually. I do it weekly and it's still shocking to me. Our process on the back end here is, if we're allowed to, we get these hashes and we'll basically we'll put them into a couple different tools. I mean, it could be NPK or Hashopolis or a local server that we have, and use the power of TPUs. So a common use case will be using NPK, where it spins up a bunch of spot instances in Amazon and uses the power of 14 machines at once, for example. So cracking that password now is even faster. Nobody likes to hear make a longer password, but we stress the longer the password, the better. More so than if I have a exclamation point and a number and it's 8 characters. We think the length is more important based on our experience. The unique local admin per device, I touched upon this earlier. I said Labs, that's just one solution. I think CyberArk. There's a handful of vendors out there that will allow you to have a centralized, unique local admin per device. Again, this is one to many, so I can't just compromise one device and all of a sudden log into every single device across the network. The next step to hardening this, which isn't on the slide here, would be to restrict a remote or network login of the local admins. So it's not, I don't see a common, there's definitely use cases for everything. I just don't see a common use case for the local admin account to be able to log in remotely. So let's say I'm sitting at my computer and I need to assist somebody else, that works at the front desk. More often than not, I'm not going to need to log in as that local admin account. I could use a help desk account, hopefully not a domain admin, but maybe a domain admin account or my account, something along those lines. But local accounts typically aren't needed there. Definitely a use case here and there, but restrict where possible. So again, that's another group policy type setting that could be enforced to stop a lot of these attack vectors. And the last, there's a couple left here. Setting up, VLANs with strict ACLs, network segmentation. Again, most places I go are still flat type networks, or will have quite a few different VLANs set up. However, the ACLs are loose, so meaning they're not that restrictive. So if I was able to get even on, when we're at 2 different VLANs, those are open to, a bunch of VLANs. So I know network segmentation is a difficult problem to solve fully, but it would definitely stop a lot of these attacks from moving across the network at a fast rate. And the last one here, disable anything that's not used. So in clear text protocols, this one is more in line with the printer type attacks that I showed previously. So a lot of these printers, when you plug them in and set them up, they have every protocol in the world checked off. Is that really needed? Most of the time it's not. It's usually just for compatibility and usability and functionality. It's not typically needed. So we usually recommend to develop some type of hardening guide for each type of device on the network and go through a checklist before putting these on the network. Now, some people will have these in place, but sometimes someone says, hey, I need this printer installed now, or what have you, and kind of skips that, which leaves the door wide open for an attacker. And here's a handful of references about each types of a few of the different attacks and the tools that I use on many engagements. Chris, apologies if I didn't let you jump in, but feel free to share your war stories or add or tell me I'm wrong. Or
no, it was great. I mean, those are definitely the most common attack vectors we normally see in engagements. So
cool.
Cool. I'm gonna let Mike get a drink of water. Thank you, Mike, for that. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. I'm gonna applaud you on this. And normally this would be where everyone would applaud, but again, things being as they are, I'm gonna let you get a drink of water real quick, refresh yourself. But thank you very much. And if anyone has any questions, as we were talking, there was a few things that came in. Christian was agreeing 100% on the printer vector, because Christian, I've actually seen Mike absolutely own a network like that in about, I'm going to call it, I know we say DA in 30 minutes, but me and him were sitting in a location. Actually, it was the coolest thing ever, just dropping it, and we were in, and that client was very impressed. Got a couple of questions. So if Michael asked, will the slides be available for future viewing? Yes, they absolutely will be. I'll put them up on our OWASP Charlotte page that I'm working on. It'll be in the 2020 section, so it'll be there. Got a question about split tunneling that I think we can talk about here in a minute, but specifically, any questions about anything that Mike just said from anybody? Okay. I think what we'll do, Parker, what I think we'll do with, Jamie, you have a question?
Yeah, do you guys write your own C2s or anything like that? Or how often do you guys write your own code to use when you're doing pen testing in an environment, like a corporate environment or whatever?
Sure. Usually we don't try to reinvent the wheel too often, so we use a handful of different C2 type frameworks. Where it comes to the customization, it will be where we're trying to get that initial foothold to that initial agent. Whether we open up, Visual Studio and create some kind of C# payload, something along those lines, that's where the customization will come into place, so we can, bypass all the things, quote unquote. That's where that comes in. So the actual C2 frameworks, no, we don't create our own from scratch. We think the ones that are out there are doing the job for now for us, but the tooling and the customizations come when we try to get an initial implant on the system. And some of the C2s that we I use most recently is the Covenant one. Previously, We used to touch upon Empire and when we basically used most of them. I mean, at least 10 different ones, but recently leaning towards Covenant.
Cool. I'm familiar with Covenant, so I'm glad you shared that.
Yeah, it makes it easy for us because we, it's better for the C# type programming. So it's just easier integration for us.
I got a question. My question is more about documentation. I know that's something, some companies struggle with and try to automate it, and things just don't work out just because of, the templating of the documentation and some of the caveats here and there when when you start documenting. Have you guys found a solution for that, or do you guys still doing a lot of the manual cut and paste from a Word doc, or do you guys found like Ghostwriter or a couple of other documentation automation tools out there? What are you guys using?
So you mean in regards to when we're doing the test, how are we documenting and presenting and reporting and collecting?
Yeah, more for the reporting portion when you're ready to present to the customer.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, every company has their own, quote unquote templates per se,
Yeah.
or some kind of flow to follow.
Right.
So we do have that kind of foundation, but there's a lot of, as much as I like to, have fun and find a lot of these vulnerabilities per se, it makes the reporting process quite long. We tend to, I try to tailor every report to that client. So yeah, you'll see the same type of structure. You'll have a table of contents, you'll have a methodology rating, conclusion, recommendation section, all that good stuff. But we try to show the steps of the attack and the evidence and all that. So that's where I've stressed to do it while we're doing the test. So take a screenshot, throw it in the report, take a snippet here and there. Not always work perfectly though. So
right.
We just try to take as many screenshots and document handwritten notes as best as we possibly can during the engagement, just so we have it in case we forget to put it in the report while we're doing it. But yeah, I mean, we do have templates per se, but they're not. It's definitely tailored per client because we have to show like, hey, we were on this box, for example. This is the machine name. This is how we did it. This go around. It's not always identical. There's definitely, there's definitely overlap. Don't get me wrong. If somebody's missing MS1710 on 10 machines, the comment's going to be relatively the same comment. The machine names are different, and the screenshots will be different. But it is what it is. So.
But have you guys found a way to automate that process? Whether it's, I think Serpico is the other application I was thinking of. So Serpico and like Ghostwriter is the other open source automation.
I can jump in on that one. In the past, I've used Dratus, which if you're familiar with,
Dratus, the other one. Yeah,
it's on Kali. I mean, it's open source, but again, it's pretty standard bearer in terms of automating like reporting, because you can throw in, because you'll see certain vulnerabilities all the time, right? And so what you do is you just build those out one, 2, 3, 4, and then bam, 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 and then you run them in. But that's typically what I've used in the past. But I'll let Mike jump back in on that too. So.
Yeah, I mean, I've used some of those, just as you say it, Josh. Just have I used them effectively, or do I think that they're making my job faster or easier? Personally, no. So gotcha. I have not found a tool. It could be maybe it's our reporting templates aren't up to par, or just don't align with the current tool sets to automate. But no, I have not found a great solution. And if anybody has a great solution, I'm open to that. Believe me, it's still a lot of, I'll take this snippet of this SSH console that I'm in right now, and I'll put it in the report, or I'll paste it in later. There's nothing that's automating fully for me.
Yeah, same here. Okay, just making sure. I know there's this really expensive option there called PlexTrack. One of my buddies was demoing it, and he says like the coolest thing ever. But I think it's charging per user, and it was just ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
But
That's good to know. I mean, I'm always open, and I love to get new tools. Again, but like you said, I mean, you got to balance that cost out too. So
right, yep.
cost thousands of dollars for a slight automation. I don't know, I have to test it out and see if it was worth it or not.
Yeah, but good presentation. I enjoyed that. Like the comment about the printer. We had one customer that had they were scanning large documents on a multi-purpose printer, and it would FTP those documents to a shared drive, right? On their individual computer. So depending on who was scanning, it would automatically FTP that directly to their printer or to their computer, and was able to change, log into the printer, change the IP to my IP, and have them FTP to me. It would automatically send the credentials to me, and I could use that to log into their computer.
Exactly.
It was pretty cool. It's like, hey, we don't really know how to secure that. They tried using SMB, but because it was a Apple product, their admin guy couldn't get that working correctly, so he had to resort to FTP. It was interesting.
Interesting. Yeah, I see that more often than I should.
I think Jerry had a question too. Thank you for that, Christian. Thank you.
I was actually just going to give a shout out for PlexTrack. I use that myself as a pen tester and absolutely swear by it. Definitely worth any penetration tester worth looking at. It's like $2,000 a year, and it saves you a ridiculous amount of time. So I don't work for PlexTrack. It's just my tool of choice.
Really? Okay. Yeah. So you're the first person I've heard that actually uses that. Just because it's so expensive. How, I guess my question is, how were you able to sell that to your boss to get that, or unless you work for yourself and you're able to do it yourself?
Yeah, I run my own consulting company, so
Gotcha.
I ran it myself. But I've used everything from SuperMicro to Dradis, to, you name it. I've tried it out, and I would say that's the only one that pretty much does everything end to end. The guy who wrote it is a pen tester. It just if you get a demo of it as a penetration tester, it just works. It is expensive, but it just works.
Yeah. Yeah, they got the buddy of mine that demoed it. He just absolutely loved it, but he couldn't get his management to buy in on it just because of how expensive it was. But
it's great. It's great. I hate writing reports, so it's great.
Nobody likes that.
I got two more questions, but what I think I'll do, Christian, do you have something to add to that? I'm sorry.
No, I'm good.
I was going to add, for the people that do use that program, is it if at the end of the day, how much customizations can I make to that? Is somebody just going to say, hey, did you just give me a PlexTrack report? I mean, I'm just curious of how flexible the tool is if you have experience with it. I'll certainly look into it now.
They'll build you, so you can take whatever template you have, and they'll build everything out custom to you. So my PlexTrack reporting is completely different to anyone else's, and everyone else will be the same. There isn't a default out of the box. They create a new one with you on every engagement, and that's for free. It comes as part of the cost of the tool.
Thanks. That's thank you. Appreciate it.
So I had two questions real quick. And I think, I think I'm just going to kind of mush them together, because Nate's asking, what's the worst password you've ever seen? And I think I'm going to parlay that by Parker asking, what's the funniest password you've ever seen? So
coronavirus. There you go. There's 9 for you.
Hold on. There we go.
The worst password I've seen is, no password, to be honest. I've walked into a place and they've had a local account on a machine, and you think the computer's locked, screen name is on, you can enter, and you're on the system. Terrible. Those are on some internal assessments. Sometimes I find that on a physical one. Typically, it could be on like a kiosk type system or what have you. But that those are still in place. Honestly, the worst password is the person's name or password. I see people's name, and you do see the typical, what everyone says is still true. You know, spring 2020, winter 2020, the exclamation point at the end of it. And I would say most people follow the same, from the passwords I've seen, they follow a very similar format. First letters capitalized, bunch of lowercase letters after that, then a number or two, and then a special character, and that special character is a lot of times it's the exclamation point. So worst, I mean, what's the other one you said, the funniest password?
Yeah, what's the funniest password you've seen?
Yeah, probably nothing I could say out loud here. People have people have some funny passwords. Yeah.
I got Christian saying I hate my boss 2018.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and then he's also saying profanity. Yes, Christian, we see. I don't want to speak for Mike, but I have seen a lot of profanity in passwords too, because people don't think it shows up, but those are usually some of the first ones in dictionary attacks that'll come up. So you'll crack those basically instantaneously.
Yep.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say any other questions.
We see a lot of quote unquote leak speak passwords. So I don't know why people think that you can just substitute a 0 and an O or something like that. I mean, there's in every single dictionary, and every single person that tries to crack a password is going to try that combination. So and it's a false sense of security.
All right. Well, any other questions for Mike and Tip regarding that? There's a couple others that I'll take offline, specifically about split tunneling and some initial setups. So I'll take those offline and I can respond later to that. But are there any other questions for Mike? Going once, going twice. Sold the lady in the second row. All right.
Happy to answer whatever I can. If I can't answer it, I'll tell you I can't answer it.
All right. Well, that's according to my schedule. I think we're wrapping up on that. But are there any?